I'd like to welcome the New Jersey Devils play-by-play announcer, Steve Cangalosi, to the BS Sports Show. Steve, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Nice to be here, guys. An empty feeling for me with no Devils as part of this tournament that's been a lot of fun over the first couple of days, the Stanley Cup qualifiers in particular. But it's great to be on your show.
Thank you very much. So obviously, like you mentioned, the Devils are not in the qualifying tournament. And these have been unique times for everyone, especially us sports fans without sports. So for a sportscaster, what have you been doing to keep busy, at least in the first part when there was no events going on? And was it nice to have a little bit of a break from broadcast?
Yeah, but the break has gone on far too long, and I think everybody in my position all throughout the NHL and all throughout the sports world is basically just ready to get back to work full force. I've had a couple of assignments for ESPN. Soccer is the other sport that I do, and I've done a couple of games nationally for them, the MLS is Back tournament. I'll probably do a few more of those as the European season gets busy in the fall after Champions League. But you have to remember, when the pandemic hit, there was a real sense of uncertainty about when we would get back to work and potentially how quickly we might get back to work. Now, I haven't called a game since March 10th. That's when the Devils played what would turn out to be their final game of the 2019-20 season and a loss to the Penguins. I woke up on the morning of March 12th thinking there was still a possibility that I was going to call a game that night. The Carolina Hurricanes were in New Jersey and still slated to play. I'm getting out of the shower that morning, and I remember talking to my producer as soon as I'm toweling off. He said, "Stay home. We don't know what's going on, but I suspect we're not doing a game tonight, and that might be the case for a little bit." So you have to remember, Brendan, there was that period of uncertainty where you had in your back of your mind, are you going to be back in 4 or 5 days? Are you going to be back in 5 to 10 days, maybe 3 weeks? And then suddenly you turn around and that turns into a break of better than 130 days for everybody in my position. So there was always that feeling of stay ready, keep your charts up to date, stay on top of what's going on with negotiations with the players and National Hockey League owners. And I basically went from going 0 to 60 right back down to 60. On March 7th, I remember, I had called 2 games in one day. I did a soccer game in the afternoon, and I did the Devils-Rangers game that night. And then suddenly, 4 days later, everything is shut down. Trying to use my time productively, working on the house, spending a lot more time with my wife, the dog, and the cat.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, all of us are doing a lot more family time than we originally had planned, but it's kind of nice to have that little bit of a step back. And for me personally, obviously, you took over for the legendary Doc Emrick, and he's now moved on to NBC Sports. And what is that like, transitioning into not only doing a play-by-play job now for the New Jersey Devils, but you're filling the shoes of one of the best NHL broadcasters to ever do it?
I still get asked that question a lot, even though it has been 9 years now since that mantle was given to me and that opportunity was given to me. I think the advantage that I had was having worked closely with Doc Emrick for a period of 5 years before I actually took over the full-time play-by-play duties. There was a period from 2006, 2007 until Doc's last season where I was the pregame, postgame, intermission host and reporting from the Arena Bowl during games when Doc and Chico were the pairing in the broadcast booth for the Devils. So there was a comfort level for me with not only Chico Resch, who would be my first full-time color commentator, but also the production crew, the longtime veterans of MSG Network and MSG Plus, who were responsible for putting together one of the great broadcasts in the NHL. So they knew what I was all about, and that made it easy. Was there pressure? I think the honest answer is yes. Doc is a legendary figure in broadcasting. He's one of the most popular people in the National Hockey League. That's something that I always tried to take from him and have in my arsenal, just dealing with people around the National Hockey League. He is likable. He gets people to share information because they trust him. And I think that's a big element of what we're all about. Lou Lamoriello was the general manager at the time. And I remember having a conversation with him about exactly this topic, the pressure of succeeding a legendary announcer. And I'll never forget what he told me. He said, "Don't worry about replacing the Hall of Famer. Don't worry about Chico Resch, who was with Doc for a period of 16 years. That was a big part of this because Chico had to get used to a new partner. Lou said to me, just worry about doing your job. Everything else takes care of itself. I thought about that a lot in the early years.
That's pretty interesting stuff. I mean, Doc Emrick, we all know. You could say the word chassis or hits the goal with the post, hits the post, and all that kind of stuff. Everything he says is just, it's awesome to hear, and you got to work with him. So that's definitely something very exciting for fans to know about, that you got to work with him and fill his shoes. So the Devils unfortunately had a really rough season. They got better as the season went on, but it wasn't a great year. At least the loss of Hall and Simmons at the deadline. But it also gives an opportunity for young players to step in there. Which young player did you see take this opportunity and run with it?
Well, the answer is in goal, because we saw Mackenzie Blackwood get better, exponentially better as the year wore on. So when you say young player, I think in the National Hockey League, sometimes that conversation tends to drift towards 19 and 20-year-olds. But I'm probably going to answer your question in the vein of guys who are just a little bit older than that. Blackwood emerged as a guy who will be a number one goaltender in the NHL. Is it long-term with the Devils? I think and hope it is. But we watched an ability by him to mature. And a conversation with Mackenzie Blackwood 2 years ago is markedly different from what it would be today. He's a little bit more humble. He's a great team guy. He's a presence in the locker room. The greatest gift he has is that he is an incredible athletic specimen. And I think physically, he's capable of taking on a workload that I think few players of his age and experience level can take on at this stage of their career. So the other guys who would fall into that category aren't rookies. Damon Severson is now 25 years old. And I don't mean to be evasive to your question, but a guy with 400 games under his belt now in the National Hockey League might not fall into that young category. But it was finally a breakthrough for Damon to show me, yes, he's going to be a top-pair defenseman in the National Hockey League moving forward. And Pavel Zacha, the long wait. Zacha's 23. Again, not tremendously young, but still a guy you put in that age group where he is identified as somebody who's still part of your future. Zacha was largely disappointing in the first few years after the Devils drafted him 6th overall. But there was that point mid-season where you found a guy who was more aggressive going to the net, more assertive. He always had something defensively going for him, but I think he grew his game beyond that. And then late in the season, Alain Nasreddine was using him on what would be a very exciting line with Nikita Gusev, the first-year NHL player from Russia, and also Jesper Bratt. And they had something very special going on. I was excited, even though the Devils were largely realistically out of it, with still some 13 games to play, to see what they could do in the balance of the season. We never got our answer to that, though.
So PK Subban, he doesn't get dealt at the deadline, but he struggles offensively, which is what he brings, an offensive defenseman. He doesn't get moved. He gets a lot of heat from fans. I'll ask you 2 questions on this. 1, what's the reason you think they kept him besides contract? And 2, despite the off-ice and on-ice struggles, because he does a lot in the community, but, maybe it gets distracting, what can he bring and teach a young Devils team?
I'll tell you what he has to bring. A lot more than 18 points in 68 games. It has to be more than that if PK Subban's time with the Devils is going to be remembered as something productive and something successful. All of the things that he brings off the ice are admirable. His charitable contributions. He is a wonderful presence in the locker room, and I think a good presence. And what he's done initially after 1 year in the community in Newark and amongst Devils fans, I think he struck a positive chord in that vein. All of that stuff has 10 times as much value if the player enacting that succeeds on the ice. And there needs to be a point where PK needs to say to himself, this is my team. This is my locker room. I think it's natural to see more of that as time progresses. But the Devils established a team and a power play, for instance, Stefan, last year, where Sami Vatanen was the number one presence on the power play. PK Subban went an extraordinary amount of time early in the season without a power play point. That can't happen. Considering his gifts, considering his sheer talent, he has to be much more productive offensively. And defensively, there was room for improvement too. There was a time where we saw him getting beat in one-on-one situations. he still exhibits an attitude where he feels he is an elite defenseman in the National Hockey League. He has a Norris Trophy on his resume. He has to get back to that level for the Devils to be everything that they can be. Why did they hold on to him at the deadline? I think the answer is pretty clear. There was a hefty price tag for a team to take. I think the Devils are willing to live with this contract short term. Remember, it's only a 3-year deal. But for a team considering where Subban's game was to make that kind of investment, didn't surprise me he remained a Devil at the deadline.
Andy Greene, a Devil defenseman for a very long time, which you definitely got to know. He joins the Islanders back in February, helped them solidify a defensive group that lost Adam Pillock. They play a very similar defensive game. And, you know, what does a veteran like that bring to the table? Even if he's not getting to play in these round-robin games or any of these qualifier play-ins, what does he bring to this team?
Andy is a pro's pro. Let's start with that. Andy Greene in the locker room makes your locker room more professional than the day before he arrived. I want to see Andy Greene play, though. And I understand the decision was a tough one probably for Barry Trotz as he put his lineup together. With Pelech healthy now, Greene was the odd man out as the Devils, as the Islanders qualifier series with Florida got underway. Couple of things about Andy Greene, because this is a stark contrast with the Islanders to what his role was with the Devils. Because prior to that trade to the Islanders, Greene was still averaging 20 minutes a night on the ice. He was essentially still, even at this stage of his career, a top pair defenseman on the New Jersey Devils. And here, for a team that goes to some version of a postseason, he's not cracking the lineup for game one. But understand what Andy Greene was. I think along with Kevin Rooney, those were the only two guys for the Devils all season long to play roughly 50 games and still be on the plus side of the plus-minus ledger. That says something about Andy Greene. I know some people think the plus-minus stat is a little bit antiquated and we shouldn't even be having it at any part of a conversation. But for a team that was bleeding goals early in the season, to see Andy Greene's time with the Devils end at +1, that says something. Keep this in the back of your mind. Lou Lamoriello basically cultivated the career of Andy Greene, signed him as a free agent, gave him his first lucrative long-term deal. Andy became a Devils captain under Lou Lamoriello. All of that stuff matters. Keep it in the back of your mind. Before the Islanders experience is over, whether it's 1 round, 2, 3, or beyond that, my suspicion is you're going to see Andy Greene play a role, not just in the locker room, but on the ice, Stefan.